Hello Star Wars fans, and welcome to episode 52 of Journey into Legends. Today we're going to be reading The New Rebellion by Christine Catherine Rush. The New Rebellion was released in 1996, and is probably the least talked about book from the Bantam era. I haven't heard anything about this book, so I'm really excited to jump into it and see what it's all about. Without further ado, let's read and review. Alright, so this book had a really explosive start, no pun intended, that really set the tone for the rest of the book, as during a speech from Leia, a bomb goes off in the Senate building and chaos ensues. Personally, I found this scene really intense and visceral, and I thought it was a great way to start the book, and it made for a really interesting plotline. I also enjoyed the political tensions it caused later on, as Leia butted heads with former Imperials in the Senate, even resulting in her stepping down as the Chief of State for a while. In true Bantam-era fashion, this book very quickly split our heroes up and sent them out in separate ways. As Leia deals with the repercussions of the Senate bombing, Han travels to an old smuggler hideout called Smuggler's Run to investigate rumors of smugglers getting rich and then disappearing. At first, I enjoyed the mystery of this plotline as Han tried to unravel this big conspiracy, but much of this plotline was spent dealing with an old adversaries of Lando's named Nandreessen, which never really went anywhere and was kind of just a waste of time. Eventually, after Nandreessen was dealt with, the plotline found its footing once more, questions started to get answered, and some bombs even went off on Smuggler's Run, which, like the Senate bombing, made those sections really intense to read. Easily my favorite aspect of this book is the villain Kueller, who ends up being the culprit behind everything that happens in the book. The bomb in the Senate, the bombs at Smuggler's Run, the disappearing smugglers, and more. I liked the way his character was written. He almost reminded me of Vader, albeit not nearly as intimidating or interesting. I really enjoyed his scenes with Luke, their fight scenes, and the conversations they had, touching on Kueller's past as one of Luke's students. I only wish that we got to see Kueller's days as a Jedi in a prior book, which would have made his scenes much more interesting. Another great addition to this book was the inclusion of Brackus, who is actually a character from Young Jedi Knights. It was great to see him show up again, younger and less evil than he was in that series. But like with Kueller, I'm just disappointed that we never actually got to see the moment when he left the Jedi Academy. Another thing Kueller does in this book is plant bombs in the New Republic's X-Wings. Overall, this was probably my least favorite storyline in the book. Like a lot of other Bantam-era novels, this book has a C-3PO and R2-D2 storyline, this being that storyline. Now, of course, I don't hate the droids, but to me, their adventures always seem so trivial compared to whatever else is happening, and that's still the case here. Also with them is a new character, a young mechanic named Cole Fardreamer. Like the droids, I thought he was a fine character. He's just not at all interesting compared to Luke, Han, Leia, or Kueller. Unfortunately, after a surprisingly entertaining first two acts, I felt that this book kinda jumped the shark with its conclusion. Firstly, they kinda just dropped Leia's political storyline in favor of having her go rescue Luke, and that plotline quickly just became your average space battle, and not a particularly entertaining one at that. The same goes for Han's storyline. After he wraps up his business on Smuggler's Run, the author just sends him over to Almania to help rescue Luke. The worst offender of these plotlines falling off the deep end is 3PO and R2's storyline. Like I said, I already found their storyline a bit boring, and then they went to the droid factory on Telti, and that whole section of the book was not only drawn out and boring, but just plain useless. And there was also a ton of other smaller things that just bothered me as well. Mara Jade came out of nowhere and was really forced into the story at the end. I wasn't a fan of how Brackus' arc ended, and I especially didn't like Kueller's death. So overall, I actually had a really fun time reading this book. I know I had a lot of negative things to say about that final act, but that's just because of how much I loved the first two. For the first 2/3 of this book, I really had no major complaints, which is honestly extremely rare for me. If the book managed to maintain its momentum and stick the landing, it honestly could have ended up being up there with the Thrawn trilogy and some of the better X-Wing books for me. That's how impressed I was with the majority of this book. Anyways, I did enjoy the book a lot, but I'm not shocked at the lack of attention it gets from fans, since in the grand scheme of things, it is still a very skippable and standalone book. Despite that though, I think it is worth the read, and I definitely recommend it to anyone that hasn't read it. Anyways, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and stay tuned for my next video where I'll be reviewing the short story collection Tales of the Bounty Hunters. See ya.